All right. Thank you. All right. Good morning, everyone. As Shelly mentioned, my name is Jared Vance. I teach 7th grade language arts at Ashland Middle School. Before I go through kind of the slideshow that I put together, kind of on some stuff that I did this school year, the population that I teach both the advanced language arts students, and then I teach also an inclusion class. So when I put this together, a lot of the examples you're going to see, the things you're going to hear about are mostly things that I did with my advanced kids. However, I was able to modify some of these things for my inclusion kids, just with a little bit more instruction, maybe a little bit more expectation discussion to go along with it. But just throwing that out there at the start. So basically what I was doing was I had a unit where the kids were able to choose their own nonfiction book from a list of about 10 books that I had. And some of them I had read, some I hadn't read all the way through. And I was looking for things that the kids could do creatively and with technology, especially this year with COVID, technology became way more important. So I was looking for something for them to do that it did not involve them having to write summaries, because let's be honest, they don't want to write them. We don't want to read them. So to make it so that was something that didn't have to be done kind of on both ends, but was different and a little bit more creative and fun on their end and much easier for me to look at after the fact, was I decided to go talk to our media specialist here to try to get some ideas of some different things we could do tech-based. And so we came up with a list of probably 25 to 30 things that I could have done, and then I narrowed it down to 10. So I'm going to share the 10 with you in the slideshow, but then I also am going to share a couple of ideas that we had that we didn't use, and some links to go along with that. So in the slideshow that I did share with everyone, I'm going to kind of go through each slide a little bit, and then feel free, as Shelly said, if there's any questions you have about any of these things, to put them in the chat, and I'll try to answer what I can. But basically, what is it and why did I use it? And like I said, it was looking for a different way to do things than just paper-based or writing on or typing on a Google Doc. Here's what happened in my part of the reading. So I was looking for something different to do, and this provided a different way for them to kind of summarize their reading and kind of show me what they were able to get out of their reading in different ways. The why saved a lot of time reading and grading. It was a lot of, I could look at it and read a little bit about it instead of having to read 100 summaries over different books. It allowed the students to show what they could in different mediums. They were able to practice the skill of summarizing and picking out important information to share. And most importantly, it hit different levels of Bloom's multiple intelligences. It allowed, especially the advanced kids, to kind of go to their strengths, but also reach out and try something maybe a little different that they weren't very comfortable with. So what I did was, the next slide kind of shows my examples of what I used. So I gave them the option of creating a comic strip, a photo collage, book trailer, podcasts, book snaps, infographics, reading rainbow review, interactive timelines, vlogs, and then I called it the tweeter, just because sometimes they find it funny at my lack of technology knowledge. And so that's what I called it, but basically it was another version of Twitter. And then the 11th on there is just some of the other options that we had. So the instructional handout that I gave them, I linked here in the slideshow. And I'm not going to read the entire thing to you, but it was basically from those options. I listed all of those options out, and then I gave a very brief description of what I was looking for. I didn't want to give them too many things to tell them this is what you need to have, because I wanted to allow them a little bit of creativity, allow them a little bit of flexibility to try to put together what they thought would look good in those options. So if you were to look at that particular sheet, all of the options are listed there. And then I did have certain requirements of how many pictures needed to be where and what students needed to do. So for the comic strip, I gave them one website, Powtoon, if they wanted to use it, or they could use something through Google, but they had to do 6 box minimum. The virtual photo collage, which is number 2, I told them they needed a minimum of 5 pictures and they had to have captions to go with it. And as you look at some of the other options, like the book trailer number 3, the create a podcast, I gave them a couple of websites that were useful in telling teachers how to put these assignments together so that they had something to look through and kind of decipher on their own the best way that they thought they could put those things together. So this is really all I gave them. Now, I did use some of these options with my class that's not an advanced class. And I had to take this sheet and I had to narrow it down to the ones that I thought they could handle, but then also I had to give them a lot more specific instructions on certain things to make sure they knew what to do. With option number 5, like the book snaps, that has to be something that if you're not paying attention, the kids are using Snapchat for other purposes instead of what they're using it for. So that was something too that we had to have a discussion about. But basically, here's the assignment sheet that I gave you, which you're welcome to look at, steal, whatever you'd like to with this. And then all the way at the bottom, I included the directions of what they had to do. So I expected them to do 3 of these. So we split their book basically into thirds, and each week they had to read about a third of it and then give me one of these to do, and then we'd do one the next week and one the following week after that. So they did 3 altogether. They were allowed to do the same one all 3 times, or they could choose different ones each time, and that was entirely up to them. So from there, what I did was on all of the next slides, I tried to give a couple of really good examples that my kids put together for each one. There are some that there are no examples for. And if you take a look at the podcast one, podcasting is a little tough in ways for the kids to share that with me. So a lot of times what they did was they recorded it on their phone and then they share the whatever they were able to record it on with me. And that was tough sometimes. So sometimes I just had to watch it from their phone. Sometimes I had to go around and do a couple different options. But the ones that there are no examples from were ones like that, which were either tough or no kid chose that particular option. I do know the book trailer one, no one chose that option, which is why there's also no examples there. But just to take a look at some of the examples. So the comic strip examples, if you click on any of those examples, they're going to have the name of the book that they chose. And again, they all had different books, and some went well above and beyond what they had to do. Some kind of met just the basic requirements. But this one only had to be, this first one that I clicked on here, only had to be a 6-panel. But this kid decided to put 9 panels and then also did a fun facts side over here on the right-hand side of theirs. So they kind of included as much as they could and went well above and beyond kind of the expectation of the 6. The second example, this student decided to use the same option. Thanks. So this particular student decided to use the comic strip option for all 3 of his. So if you were to take a look at his, he did it a little bit differently. Instead of having the 6 panels just on one, he decided to do slides for each one. And then kind of as you go through each one, he just continued it on, kind of being continuous the entire way down. And I know I'm going through it pretty quickly, which I can slow down if you like, but you also have access to this to take a look at kind of as you get a chance to. So those were 2 pretty good examples that I had seen, and never having done this before, those were 2 that I thought I would share that looked pretty decent and hit the requirements. Let's see here. The next one was a photo collage, and with this one I had to make sure that I went back and talked a lot about, because what was happening was they started just putting pictures in, and they just turn it in with pictures. And sometimes I can obviously tell what the pictures related to, but then sometimes I couldn't, and there was no real connection there. So I had to go back and ask them to provide me with some connections to whatever they were reading and the pictures that they had. So this student, he also decided to set his up in slides, and he added some pictures and then did a pretty good job of writing a description next to each picture and kind of how it fit. And I was not even expecting this much writing. So this kid kind of went above and beyond here with as much writing and to the pictures that went with it. So his was pretty good. And then, let's see here. This one was a lot less on the slide detail. Let's see here. And a lot more on the visual effects. So she went through, set it up this way where you could just kind of go through the slide. There were pictures, and then there was description to go along with it as well. But this one was really well done over her book, and not just a straight, here's a basic slideshow that you have to go through all the different slides. So that one was that there. The third option that I went with was the book snaps, and this is the one that I talked about a little bit. Obviously, we probably try not to promote using Snapchat in the classroom when things are going on, but it can be used for some good things. And I know people have tried this one, and this was the first time I tried this option. So I kind of let the kids go with it as long as they were using Snapchat for what they were supposed to. So the requirement was that they had to take a picture of a page in their book where they found something important, something about the person the book was about, an event, a conflict, something along those lines. And then they were required to mark up the page with the information that they found important. So on this particular slide, you can see some of the stuff that this student had marked up that she felt was important, added some filters and things to go along with it, and then a caption down at the bottom. And then she also over here, even though she had the caption, which was all I required, was the caption that was there with a little bit of information, she even typed up a little bit of information on the side, which gave me a little bit more about her book and explained a little bit more that maybe I did not know at the start. So that one's pretty good. And the link that's listed on the instruction sheet, that one's really good for explaining how to get the kids involved in using these, but it also provided some strong examples that the kids were able to look through. And those examples helped the kids put these together so that they had something to go off of instead of basically just a blank canvas that they had to figure out on their own. So there is that one. The next one was an infographic, and it was very similar to a timeline, except what I expected was there to be pictures and then captions to go along with it, some explanation to go along with it. And it didn't have to go in order, much like a timeline does have to go in order. So if you take a look here on this one particular student went through and listed all of the different colleges that were brought up in this particular book. This book was about Perry Wallace, who was a basketball player. So he brought in the elements of the different schools and the different basketball games that Perry was involved in, but then also in the description was able to talk about how he was treated during that time and kind of the tough things that he went through while also working on the basketball piece. The second example here was pretty well done. Also connected kind of different pieces here where this was kind of his way to show me to go around and read it and check it out. So you can see the lines that connect, and I tried to follow the lines as we went through. But he was reading about Jim Thorpe and everything that Jim Thorpe had gone through in this book. So he also put a couple pictures there and then put the captions and the description there to go along with that. Next, I did the Reading Rainbow review. This is one I did not find online. This is actually something I took from the teacher that I student taught with. She would have her students do Reading Rainbow reviews as part of like book chats or book presentations. So I kind of stole that one, but I turned it into a virtual option where the students had to put themselves in Reading Rainbow. And we actually watched a couple clips so they were able to see kind of what Reading Rainbow looked like back in the day. So they were able to watch that example and then put one together. I only had one student choose this option, and I included his video. It's a pretty good video. Probably going to play it for you.
Butterfly in the sky, I can go twice as high. Take a look, it's in a book, a reading rainbow.
Picture this. You arrive at your first day of college basketball, just to find out you're the only black person in the whole division. That's 1 out of 210. Well, guess what? That happened to a man named Perry Wallace, which inspired Andrew Marinus to write the book Strong Inside. Strong Inside is a true story about how Perry Wallace broke the color barrier to the Southeastern Conference of the NCAA. During his 4 years at Vanderbilt, he had to show extraordinary persistence to overcome struggles such as inequality, his mother's death, and hostility from everyone he was surrounded by. He was inspired to be a trailblazer for equality by men such as Martin Luther King Jr. and Stokely Carmichael. He succeeded, averaging 13 points and 12 rebounds a game, proving to the Southerners that just because he was black didn't mean he couldn't achieve great. I highly recommend this book if you like reading about historic events and events that took place during the Civil Rights Movement. Even if you don't, it's a great book to read. It shows examples of perseverance and the overcoming of racial struggles. Strong Inside is a slam dunk.
So that was one that I only, like I said, only had one student do. And these are things with technology that I'm not even sure how to instruct kids how to do. And so he, along with his parents, I believe, helped him put that together. We're able to kind of mix in the Reading Rainbow aspect at the beginning and then record the video to go along with that. So the next one is the interactive timeline. Much like the infographic, this was very similar, except obviously it had to be put in timeline fashion. So this particular student read Strong Inside. And so what he did was he took the timeline and he put it on a couple different slides. But what I told him was, because it's an interactive timeline, they had to put in links to videos, they had to put in links to music, they had to put in links to some type of article, newspaper clippings, even Google Maps, just so that you could kind of go to the places that they talked about. So in his, where he has Vanderbilt University here kind of highlighted, it opens up to the Google map where that would be located, and a picture of that on the side. So in order to make it interactive, they had to add in the links to make it interactive for me. So it was just not a basic timeline with here's what happened in the order that it happened in. So he did a couple slides, pictures to go along with that, and then the description to go with those items. And then the second option, she kind of did hers a little bit differently in that she set it up in the same slide fashion, but through the timeline and telling me what it was, she also included her links that took you to various places that would talk to you about, you know, who these people were or pictures of them, things like that. So that was a big piece of it in the interactiveness, because I can have them just do a basic timeline, but you have to be able to give me more than that so I can see that you put some time in. And for this, I mean, I did not require this student to do 23 slides on their particular third of their book. I think the requirement was maybe 7 events or something along those lines. So she went well above and beyond here with her interactive timeline. And then the tweeter one, the kids know that there's a very good website that you can get the Twitter templates from to add those in. And some of those turned out pretty good. Some of those were a little rough. Some of the kids aren't that familiar with Twitter as others are. So it was more of, here's Twitter, here's how Twitter is used. And on my end, realizing too that I'm not going to get a project that has, grammar that's 100% or sentences that are written out completely like they should, because it's supposed to be a tweet that the kids put together. So they put, this particular student took that template of the tweets and then was able to put some of the things together about those particular people. And then she also put some links down here at the bottom because she wasn't able to get those links on those particular boxes. And then this student had read A Mighty Long Way. And so what she did was she went and typed them in to, it may have actually been Twitter and not the actual templates that she was given, but then she took pictures of those and then she put those pictures right here in her slides, right next to pictures to go along with that. And hers were a little more grammatical and sentence based than maybe what Twitter would actually be. So those were kind of the 10 options that I required the kids to do kind of for that project. And like I said, I know I didn't have examples of all of them. That's because most of those, the ones that I don't, the kids did not do. But those were some of my best examples that I had from what the kids did. And I talked to them yesterday a little bit. I asked them for their feedback on things we had done this year. And this was one of the things they liked doing. They didn't necessarily like the books they had to do them over, but they said that they liked being given the options and different choices to choose kind of what fits them and to try some things that they wouldn't normally do. So those are that particular piece. This piece that I added was something that I got from Teachers Pay Teachers. So I'm going to give them credit, but I did share it here with you as well. This was something that's called a one-page project, which I didn't use with this particular assignment, but I did use with other assignments where instead of giving them a test or some big assessment at the end, giving them the option to just put one page where they're specifically required to do something over their book. So I attached here, and it went with the novel The Giver, which is exactly what I used it for when we read The Giver. But it could be adapted to any other book, any other story. It could be adapted in other content areas, as could all of these others. They can be used in social studies, science, things across the board. So it's also cross-curricular and things they could use there. But on the sheet, here's everything that they were required to do. And we went over each of those requirements, what they needed to do. I allowed them to do it on paper, or I allowed them to do it online. Again, I gave them the choice because I feel like when they have the choice, there's a lot more ownership and they feel a little more willing to work a little harder on some of the things and put more time into and be proud of when they have the choice there. But underneath, there's also the rubric that goes with it. And then there were some samples. So I provided them with these 2 samples that came with this particular purchase from Teachers Pay Teachers. So they were allowed to look at those 2 samples, but that was it. And then they had to put the rest together kind of on their own. So I did include an example here that was digital. And this was kind of his idea of what this one pager should look like. And with all of the different requirements met, with the borders of quotes and the pictures that go along words that went along with the theme. He had to have quotes over here on the side. So a lot of different things here that he was able to represent in this particular example. And then on the next slide, I took some pictures of some of the paper-based ones that I had that turned out really well also and met the requirements. And I shared those here so you can see what those are. But that also allowed me to know that they understood the book, they understood the theme, they understood the characters, the setting, the pieces and parts. And The Giver's not an easy book to understand at times. So this allowed them a different way of putting their knowledge together instead of having to write an essay or take a test or write a summary or things like that. So I wanted to share this too because I thought this was a really cool way to do that. And again, not mine. I give credit to whoever I was able to get that from. And then my last slide here is these are some other options that the media specialist and I had on our paper that I did not throw out to the kids. Some of these links have many different ideas that the kids could go through. And so this one in particular is 15 different book report ideas that the kids could do that are completely different, which again, this is what we do as teachers. We take what's out there and use it to our advantage. So you can take these things and kind of adapt those things. And these are things that even though I didn't use this year, doesn't mean I won't go back and try to adjust some as I use this in the future. But then there was also a communicate with the author option, 10 techie alternatives, a text conversation, and then over here off to the side is faketextmessage.com. And I've not used this, nor have I really looked at that site much, but that's an option. And then there's some other ideas here, a Craigslist ad and create an ad or post for an Amazon product that would relate to a book. So these were just some of the other options that we came up with, but there are many more out there, obviously. So that was me going through my slideshow pretty quickly, just to look at some of the examples and some different ways to have the kids practice picking out the important things without necessarily having to have them write about all of the important things. I find that 7th graders especially struggle with picking out what are the most important events. And sometimes that's subjective. It's not necessarily an objective kind of skill. Now, when it comes time to test, it's a little less subjective, but this allowed them to open up the ways in which they try to find the information that they thought was important and express that through different ways. So I know I'm supposed to go an hour.
Sorry. What are some of the challenges, if any, your lower students had with this project? I am teaching ELA in 9 through 12 resource room.
So with that, when I talk about my higher population, I can let them go with way less instruction, with way less requirements, and just see what they come up with. I can allow their creativity to kind of go. When you're working with different populations, that's not always the case. Sometimes they need way more instruction, way more detail, a few more examples to see before they really get the idea of what they want to do or how to model it off of. So with this particular assignment that I did, I had done this with my advanced kids before I allowed my inclusion class to do something very similar, so that way I had some of these examples to use so it could kind of guide them in the direction that they needed to go. I also had to take, I think I took the list of 10 that I gave on this assignment sheet and I took it down to 5 or 6, so that way they were a little more limited in their options, but also in options that they were probably a little more comfortable with. I will tell you, I did let them use the book snap one, and I would probably not do that again unless the group that I had, I felt like I could handle that, because that turned into a lot of more using phones for unnecessary reason, texting friends, actually Snapchatting other things instead of working on their project. So that was one that I had a lot of trouble with. That, again, it would depend on the group as to whether I used it. But the rest, I used the timeline, I know for sure. I used the photo collage for sure with them. I used the comic strip with them. I took out the Reading Rainbow one. I took out the podcast one, and I took out the book trailer one because I knew those would probably be a little tougher. So I took those ones out specifically, and I kept in the ones that would be a little bit easier for them to be able to put it all together. So with the photo collage, all they had to do was go find pictures, and then they still had to do the same thing with the expectation. The timeline, they still had to find pictures and put it in order, and they still had to make it interactive, which they struggled with. So I had to model that and talk about good things that would include in there. So when I really instructed and assigned this to my advanced population, it was a probably 20-minute conversation. Whereas when I instructed it with my inclusion class, it was probably more of a little bit longer, and we went through some of the options together and talked about them more so before I just let them go.
Thank you. Any other questions?